Good evening, everyone. I know so many of you here, and for those I don't know, I'm Ann Corso, the Executive Director here at the Michener Art Museum. And on behalf of our trustees, staff, and volunteers, I want to welcome all of you to this installment of the Putman Arts Leader Lecture Series. We are very grateful to the Putman family and their vision, and the Mary Louise Putman Endowment that sponsors and supports this program. And as all of you know, we are thrilled. We are absolutely thrilled and honored to have Anila Agha as our featured speaker tonight. And if you haven't had the opportunity to spend some time in her exhibition, Interwoven, please find time to do so. It is powerful, poignant, and just visually stunning. So spend some time in there, if not tonight, another day. I should say a couple of thank yous, not only for this program tonight, but for the exhibition that inspires it. The exhibition was organized by our friends and colleagues at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art out near Pittsburgh. And the presentation here at the Michener was generously sponsored by the Richard C. Von Hess Foundation, Alex and Pat Gorski, Jim McKinney, Tim Griffith, the Bucks County Tourism Grant Program, the Kobe Foundation, with additional support from the Bucks County Foundation. But of course, most of all, I want to thank the extraordinary artist, Anila Agha, for trusting us with her artwork and for sharing her life stories with us tonight. For those of you who don't know her biography, it is long and impressive, but a few of the salient points is that she was born in Pakistan, where she was trained in textiles and absorbed the rich artistic tradition of the architectural and cultural heritage of her country. She emigrated to the U.S. to pursue her graduate work and artistic training, and really established her professional practice here, just as the new millennium was beginning. And in the last 25 years, Agha has become an international tour de force in the art world. Her artwork is represented in public and private collections around the world and has been exhibited at more institutions than I can possibly name in my time here on the stage. But a few highlights are the Royal Botanical Gardens in London, the Kunsthaus in Switzerland, the International Craft Biennale in South Korea, stateside at the Ammon Carter Museum of American Art, the Wichita Art Museum, Cincinnati Art Museum, Toledo Art Museum, and so many, many more. And Agha's work explores the themes of spirituality, the roles of women, cultural influences across time and across the world. And I think her work is both personal and universal at the same time. So tonight we have a slightly different kind of format. You will hear from Anila herself, and then partway through the program, two of the staff members who know her artwork best and who were instrumental in this installation will join the stage. That's Joshua Lessard, our Director of Exhibitions, and our Jerry and Marguerite Lenfest Chief Curator, Laura Turner-Igo. So we will kick things off with Anila Agha. Thank you very much. Welcome, and we're honored to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you, and this is a wonderful crowd. Lisa Naples told me, we became friends, and we exchanged work, but she said to me, I was only expecting 5 people to come, but 100 people showed up for her. And so I'm really honored that so many people came today. It is wonderful to see Doylestown together like this. So to start with, I want to tell you that art for me is often inspired and informed by the politics or social conditions around me and that affect my life. And this would be my 26th year in the United States of America, and I have been here more than I have lived in Pakistan now. And so sometimes, occasionally, we get a little time to go and enjoy ourselves. So Steve, my husband, and myself going ziplining in Asheville, which was wonderful and really, really scary. I was born and raised in Pakistan during fairly political and turbulent times. The country was very new, but its roots were really, really old, with very new geographical borders. And what that does to you is that it, when a new country is being made, so the subcontinent fought for its freedom from the British, who had occupied the subcontinent, which comprises of multiple countries now, for more than 2 centuries. And so when the subcontinent disintegrated into multiple countries, historically, it was the largest migration of people across borders, and many, many people died. And the Hindu denomination people moved east, and the Muslims moved west. And in the process, there was a lot of bloodshed and chaos, and much of it obviously was initiated by the British because they believed in divide and rule. And so they left a chaos behind, which kind of created residue that still permeates in the air in multiple countries in South Asia. After independence from Britain and India, Pakistan developed amnesia over its centuries-old connection to India, or Hindustan as it was at that point in time considered or named. And so that sort of often happens to countries that create new borders and they want to make a new story for themselves. And so it's a way to rally your people behind a new identity. And Pakistan wanted a new identity that negated its Hindu roots and wanted to show solidarity with the Arab nations because of the religious connotations. And in my mind, that often is misguided maybe sometimes because, people from Pakistan are often very gregarious. We gather around food and dance and we sing and we are quite funny actually, which sometimes people don't realize. And so that started a new era for Pakistan to look forwards to something that was completely new. And forgetting about the ancient connection to the wonderful history that India carries. And so for me, despite cultural disapproval and due to the religious dominant practices, I decided to enroll myself into an art school. And boy, that was problematic. The years at art school were wonderful. I learned a lot. I also realized I love to make stuff with my hands and think about things. And I was very fortunate at the time to be encouraged by professors, mostly women professors, who encouraged us to go out on marches, kind of like the one that's scheduled for the 18th. Similarly, we were protesting the Hudud Ordinance, which was a set of laws that criminalized non-marital sex, including rape, and led to thousands of women being imprisoned for years for so-called honor crimes. And I think it occurs to me quite often that historically the residue of war or disagreements or just pure bloody-mindedness of politicians often results in women losing rights by being the first targets of the new regime. And this is exactly what happened in Pakistan, unfortunately. And I wanted to mention that I am very lucky these days that I get to travel a lot. And in recent times, I've visited multiple countries, been to Pakistan, UAE, Canada, Britain, and Morocco. I get to see old and new friends constantly, which is really lovely. You get to spend small time periods with them. I wish it was longer. And every 4 or 5 years, I get to go to Pakistan as well to spend time with my loved ones and my friends that I've known for now, I guess, 35 years. And so it's always amazing. Friends such as these, and some of these you can recognize because there's Laura and Jeremiah, who curated this exhibition. They help us by finding ourselves, providing sympathy, love, care without judgment, which is so important for an artist. And also, additionally, I believe we women and people who identify as female must always provide a helping hand to each other to continue to create equity for all people. Last year, 2024, I was asked to be the artist ambassador for Indiana State through Newfields, which is the museum there, and Indianapolis Museum of Art. Apparently, like hundreds of thousands of people walk through state fairs, and so they wanted to put up something that was diverse and interesting, and they chose my work. I created 4 new murals for them, which you can see at the bottom. And the murals were titled, "These Flowers Are For You," to serve as a bouquet of flowers for all the people who attended the state fair and were able to visit this artwork. In my late 20s, I moved to the US and started over as an immigrant, which is very, very difficult, as I'm sure many of you realize. Dallas was home at the time as I went to the University of North Texas. There I was often encouraged to conform and make work in a more Eurocentric manner. Of course, I rebelled against that. After graduation, I moved for an artist residency to Houston, which felt more like a place I could find nourishment. And I was at the Houston Craft Center, where I made a lot of work, and much of it started happening without discouragement or negation of like craft techniques or embroidery that I continue to use now. I also must mention that in the US, I have faced discrimination as an immigrant and found much in common with discrimination I faced as a woman in Pakistan. And having moved around a lot, I feel a deep affinity with displaced people anywhere in the world, and this piece reflects much of my oeuvre. Commerce and trade have opened up cultures via both assimilation and appropriation. A few years ago, a journalist in London asked me a question: isn't appropriation akin to admiration? And so my response was, admired appropriation is based on equal footing. But when it's done through colonization, I consider it a stealing, which I truly believe in. And this piece was inspired by Durer's A Great Piece of Turf. You see a version of it in your Interwoven exhibition here in deep red. And it's much smaller than this piece. This is 12 feet wide. It also has William Morris's textile designs, since he was so inspired by Islamic architecture and art, but never gave credit to it. I felt like I will reappropriate some of his flower heads and put them in there and have people figure out if they can put the tail on the donkey. I don't know if anybody, even if I remember myself, which were those pieces. So the history tells us that capitalism and colonization brought many problems in its wake, as we are all aware now. Currently, the biggest challenge affecting the planet is, of course, climate change. And it seems much of the previously colonized regions of the world that were eroded with loss of resources and people through both slavery and servitude will continue to pay the price in our current global environment. I myself am responsible too, as I fly quite often and I drive a car and, you know. So this piece is a mirrored stainless piece, stainless steel, and reflects the world back upon ourselves. I think nature and human are inextricably linked. According to scientists, the planet's warming through climate change will continue its destruction, affecting the global south and its populations, with rising waters causing people to become displaced in the low-lying areas such as Bangladesh, of course, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Bahamas, New Orleans, the west coast of the Americas. And so the forest fires on the west coast, and of course the drinking water that's going to affect all of us. I think no one will be safe, in my opinion, and the wars that we continue to add to our yearly roster doesn't help the world with its displaced refugees, yet humans seem incapable of learning from past histories. The global north, in my opinion, is having to contend with refugees showing up on its borders. I suppose we could let them drown in the oceans or die on the borders, or we could let them into our borders and start managing our contributions to the wars and heating of the planet. I hope, although I am very skeptical, that maybe humans will choose humanity over their own comfort and economics. So this slide and the previous two slides reflect the present and future migrations of people and animals, appropriation, colonization, commerce, and the breakneck speed of the use of the Earth's resources and the underserved communities of the world. So many people fleeing for safety for their families and their loved ones. I like this passage of the book, The Invisible Dragon, Essays on Beauty by Dave Hickey. I wonder how many people know of him. He writes, "Beauty is not a thing, the beautiful is a thing. In images, beauty is the agency that causes visual pleasure in the beholder, and since pleasure is the true occasion for looking at anything, any theory of images that is not grounded in the pleasure of the beholder begs the question of art's efficacy and dooms itself to inconsequence." This paragraph gave me personally a desire to create beautiful art. It may also have been due to the very, very brutal critiques I received in grad school regarding my very well-crafted textile work. Often the comments and the critiques circled around the inconsequential and banal nature of beauty. Around that time, I realized the importance of investing my work with meaning. There have and continue to be 4 through lines in my work. I started out by wanting to provide some insight on where I come from. Secondly, I was and continue to make work about women and minorities. I continue to utilize textile processes, materials, and content. And lastly, my concerns have grown focused and become all-encompassing on climate change and its results, i.e. the previously colonized regions, the third world, will once again pay the price for human greed. Over the past 2 decades, during my travels both to Pakistan and elsewhere, I have and continue to explore historical buildings, My process of self-discovery has led me to the conclusion that I'm deeply interested in metaphorical architectural spaces, interiors and exteriors, suggestive of the private and social political domains. I'm further fascinated by the combination of the old and new, patched together to preserve both ancient and new, similar to human lives and our relationships. I love experiencing the imaginary vibrations through the ground of centuries of people having lived in these old spaces, renewing them time and time again, hopefully with improvements. So I want my art to shift between ideas of displaced and reconstructed identity, reflecting my own experiences. And I wanted to touch upon literacy that allowed me to soar while using gender and its resultant issues as a point of discussion. And to make my art excruciatingly beautiful, creating a cliffhanger where opposites collide or meet, creating a combustible moment. I want the viewer to confront the contradictory nature of all intersections while simultaneously exploring boundaries. Noticeably, my work has grown more abstract, with the narrative element dependent on both the invisible and the actual presence of displaced and gendered identities. A Beautiful Despair was conceived and completed during the pandemic, thus reflective of the huge losses we have all faced, yet there's hope for renewal. A Flood of Tears is in this show. Gathering Storms took 10 years to complete. It reflects on the needs to conserve resources we humans depend upon to survive on this planet. The red beads suggest the need for an immediate action because of the color and the delicate nature of the glass. The needles have a dual role, that is, they can act as weapons of destruction or tools to mend our ways. The straight edge of the glass floor and the grid shows the advances in engineering and science humanity has achieved. The handmade strands reflect the huge amount of labor we all need to do to correct the balance on this earth. This piece points to the effects of climate change through war, loss of resources, and natural disasters wreaking havoc on vulnerable populations, including and definitely females and minorities. I start with familiar Islamic motifs I have seen or photographed that in due course become reinterpretations of the original designs and allow me to infuse a contemplative focus suggestive of the underlying order of both the cosmos and the natural world through symmetries found in nature. I am interested in projects that explore contradictions such as the gaze and who is viewing whom, contradictory perspectives, desire for recognition, the hidden and the revealed. Often my goal is to explore the binaries of public and private, light and shadow, and static and dynamic by relying on the purity and inner symmetry of geometric design and the interpretations of the cast shadows and the sculptural installations, which are often extremely chaotic. I enjoy the contradiction of chaos enclosed within regimented geometries in the more intimate flatworks or the chaotic immersive shadows that result from rigid geometric objects like the cubes. And my artwork stems from a desire to research, review, highlight, or correct in some small measure the gender and racial imbalances that exist in the world due to race, color, creed, class, or gender. The familiar Islamic geometric motifs, due to their reproductions in public environments, allow me to elevate them to the extraordinary, to reveal the complexities of symbiosis between genders, cultures, civilizations, and the amorphous borders between them all. While I lived in Pakistan, I found the gender intolerance perpetuated by literacy or illiteracy and, in my opinion, incorrect interpretation of religious dogma, and of course perpetuated by the state-sanctioned laws such as the Hudud Ordinance. However, it is obviously not a problem based only in the poor regions of the world, as we all now know now. It is a global problem perpetuated by the hunger for power by politicians, semi-literacy of populations desperate for the basics of life, lack of opportunities, and economic conditions directly resulting in ill treatment of gendered people. So I became very interested in the gender complexities in our societies when I lived in Lahore. Over time here in the US, through the research and my art-making process, I continue to understand gender politics, intersectionality, patriarchal domination, identity, race, colonization, and its aftermath. During the COVID pandemic years, I read books that blew my mind. Some of them are really hard. 1619 Project, Ain't I a Woman and Against White Feminism. All are critical and many may not appreciate them. But I was alone in a studio, which was extremely large, and I could play the radio really loud and listen to these books while I was working. So for me, it's become apparent to me for the defensiveness we encounter when dominant cultures create policy that affects Black, male, female, LGBTQ, or in between. I think the defensiveness and intolerance harms all of us, physically and mentally. Currently, I've reread the book titled Strong Men by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I suggest all of you read it, if you can, to understand the authoritarian tendencies we are witnessing in global politics now. I am very cynical as I see hypocrisy in world politics that elevates certain regions over others. The wars in the Middle East are indicative of this phenomena. And during my earlier research, I explored American artists such as Eva Hess and Cy Twombly, and was very drawn to their alternative style of drawing. I consider much of my work to be drawing in space. I myself was making drawings. I felt drawing had to be personal, and for me it became a way of expression. I decided to stretch it to encompass mark making through multiple mediums. It has obviously helped me open up to new worlds and new size, which is wonderful. So in my drawings and flat work, embroidery takes the feminine into the masculine arena, subverting the known balance of power and ensuring conversations about the definitions of low craft versus high art, and assigning feminine or masculine roles to objects, processes, and situations. I often think of the numerous invisible women who hold families together, create communities, build homes, and in spite of issues besetting them, manage strength in the face of adversity. I have been drawn to collecting surface, patterned, and textiles all my life, but initially shied away from exploring it in my work, however it showed up in anyway. I think it was due to the condescending debate on pattern and decoration being too feminine and thus crafty and carrying little to no meaning while at grad school and then the early 2000s. Now one sees textiles everywhere at all the art fairs, actually. I've been to 2 recently, and the textiles were the rage. I'm glad that artists, including me, are using patterning, textiles and textile processes, embroidery and craft, methodologies to tell stories like Lisa Butler, Pasita Abad, Nick Cave, and many others. Often these artists use embellishments as a strategy to blur the lines between function and decor. I conceive my flat works often as a series of collage drawings, thinking of them like pages from a book, to provide a continuous narrative. My drawings are concerned with similar objectives as the installations, but on a more intimate level. Over the years, I've also noticed that I jump back and forth between time and go back to fix something or remake something or cut it and use it in a future work. Usually the impetus is to explore how social and gender-based issues result from concepts constructed by our past and recent histories and traditions that continue to shadow us into our contemporary times. Through the use of a mixed media approach, I explore the deeply entwined political relationships between gender, culture, religion, labor, and social codes. In my drawings, I use combinations of textile processes such as embroidery, wax, dyes, silkscreen printing, both traditional drawing materials, processes, as well as sculptural methodologies to reveal the gendering of textile and craftwork as inherently domesticated and excluded from being an art form. I also love adding wax effects through the use of surfaces and mylar to obscure or reveal layers similar to the concept of the jalis of South Asia. So my experiences in both my native country and as an immigrant here in the United States inform and are woven into my work, as you can see, rewriting women's handiwork as a poignant form of creative expression. The drawing medium in my work is really the embroidery. And it shows the interaction of concept and process and to bridge the gap between modern materials and historical patterns of traditional oppression and domestic servitude. And all of my work, in fact, is very labor intensive, revealing and concealing through process, materials, and concept. Its deep intent. Shadows, of course, add another layered dimension to the drawings, and the piece becomes a three-dimensional project. I also believe in building community in the place I live through dialogue, tolerance, acceptance, and understanding. This desire to build bridges comes from earlier memories of my mother from Pakistan. In the fall every year, my mother would invite women of the neighborhood to help make quilts. The women didn't belong to any one particular social construct. They would come with their needles and threads, making the quilts by hand while talking about families, neighborhoods, and our community. The quilts were the result of a social endeavor my mother organized. So within my work, embroidery embodies an essential femaleness because the push of the needle and the pull of the thread together represent the domestic identity of women and their ambivalent relationship to that identity. Furthermore, the embroidery is a drawing line and beckons people in to look deeper irrespective of gender, sexual preference, or cultural background. I also hope that it makes them rethink about their own backgrounds and all the prejudices we all carry within us. During the embroidery process, the needle and the myriad threads stitch the personal narrative of community, thus creating beautiful but invisible stories within the very essence of the work. And the seductive and layered surfaces may suggest a deeper exploration of issues of submission, oppression, and domesticity. So my large-scale sculptural installations create universally welcoming environments through the interplay of light shadow, while the embroidered works on paper create intimacy and the presence of the feminine. So conceptually, using my own experiences as a woman of color, my artwork reaches beyond the personal to explore cultural binaries, such as light, dark, masculine, feminine, public, private, definite, amorphous, life, death, and religious and secular. Growing up in an amnesia-induced Muslim country led to many early experiences of exclusion due to my gender, subsequently being an immigrant in an alien culture has its own challenges. And despite power inequities, home is a familiar place, and the feelings of inclusivity and intimacy is what I have sought to recreate in my work. My sculptural practice was initially inspired by a visit to the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. There I experienced a space that had inherent contradictions, that is, similarities and differences like in both Pakistan and the US. Yet I had the freedom to experience the place, the space, the environment without bias. The complex the palace was both alien, built by the Moors, but also uncannily familiar to me. It became my goal to recreate that wondrous experience through my artwork. I use pattern and color to construct architectural environments that create contradictions such as male and female, light and dark, heavy and light, fragile and strong, to show that our lives are abound with contradictions. Vivid color combinations and abundance has often been attributed to cultures that were considered exotic and thus less sophisticated, thus losing validity. If you notice, European cultures are often muted and neutral colors are used. I use bright colored walls for the spaces I illuminate with my sculptures, once again elevating that which has been considered unimportant. The resulting sculptures are steel cut with delicate lace-like patterns that reflect and refract light, integrating light and shadows with solid forms. My installations aspire simultaneously to be perceptually soothing and conceptually challenging. The shadows cast in all directions by the light spilling through the sculpture's cut-out surfaces work magically, creating a dynamic transformation of the space in tandem with the itinerant movement of the audience, and allow viewers to bask in universal splendor that belongs to all of us. In such a space, it becomes possible to explore the powerful dialogue of shared experience that transcends the barriers that exist due to gender, color, race, religion, or whatever. Rethinking our relationship to the planet, empowerment of the world's populations, and revamping the educational materials is essential to the well-being of the world population. I strongly believe if we educate a single mother, the whole family will benefit. I think maybe such a strategy will make politicians work harder on our behalf. I imagine that's the reason education often is very poorly funded. And I think maybe banning books instead of guns may be a better strategy, personally. At the conception and production of this particular piece called Intersections, I think Steve is somewhere in the back. We had long discussions about me making an object that reminded or was reminiscent of the Kaaba in Mecca. And that was kind of like a slightly scary thought because, some maniac may have taken exception to my using the Kaaba as an inspiration. So we talked a lot about it, and in making the cube, I was essentially critiquing organized religion, actually. My intent at the time was to rectify the injustices perpetrated on women and minorities in the world and cultures across the world due to religious dogma. And it was sort of like, it was a new direction. It was scary to go so big suddenly. But this work at that time was a way to redress the balance in occupying the oft-considered male position of an architect and using a structured geometric object built with materials, once again, often attributed to men. I had dealt with many slights as a woman. While growing up in Pakistan, I had observed female relatives suffer domestic abuse with limited protection from male relatives and had become very quietly convinced to never place myself in a similar position. The perforated Cuban lacy jolly with the light was my way of using a female perspective in creating space that was in direct contrast to a male space. The inclusive spaces I create is by extension and invitation for inclusion for all people, irrespective of race, color, gender, or creed. Discrimination in both the East and West may originate due to differing reasons, but accomplish the same results, I think, like keeping half of the world population dependent and behind economically. In addition to questioning the assumptions behind the geometric or non-figurative form as certain and static, my work also provokes an investigation into the questions of authenticity, which are central to the post-colonial condition. The intertwining of light and shadow, original and derivative, are at the core of the various renditions of the pattern. They mirror the post-colonial quest for originality and purity, and ultimately circular geometric pursuit where primary form can only be imagined and never really captured. In our current environment where difference and divergence dominate most conversations about the intersections of civilization, my artwork explores the presence of harmonies that do not ignore the shadows, ambiguities, and dark spaces between them, but rather explore them in novel and unexpected ways. So clearly, my installation projects use light and pattern, along with the palpability of reflection to question the assumptions of geometric design as a form of the pure and transcendent, and thus opposite to representational art. For me, the audience presence becomes essential in experiencing a shared space while simultaneously affording intimacy suggestive of the fluidity of human interactions. Often the large projects start with some political news such as the plight of refugees, immigrants, but also envelops my own experiences of exclusion as a woman of color here in the US and simply a woman in Pakistan. Over the last decade, I have experimented with painting the environments in bright or dark colors and using multiple light sources to create overlapping shadows to demonstrate multiplicity and intersectionality. And as an immigrant myself who worked hard to help myself and others in my community of artists, I hope the American dream comes true for many others who flock to the shores of the US. While living outside of the US, people often talked about the US as a beacon of light. For people to flock to, there in America, one can find freedom. I remember people telling me. However, the vision of America internationally may have tarnished over the last few years, or decades, maybe. During the concept development, many of these projects, I felt the vision of America has become a mirage, where on arrival, the USA is unable to provide respite to the hungry and the needy, and this work and the previous work kind of reflect that idea. Shadows fascinate me, as you may have noticed. They are conceptual drawings in the space. A three-dimensional object flattens and overlaps due to the light and its direction. Conceptually, it speaks volumes on how the world is simultaneously porous and siloed. Of course, there are boundaries and hierarchies one is not allowed to cross, keeping large populations in place, which to me is a very colonized view of perceiving the world, I think. This piece is very interesting to me because a pyramid architecturally and metaphorically speaks of human development in history. Recorded human history is full of wonderful inventions, developments, and the art, and art and science and architecture. Conversely, it's also full of deplorable behavior, pillage of the earth and its denizens. So through my work, it's often my desire to convey the contradictions that abound in our world between race, color, etc., etc. Many artists have over the years influenced me. Robert Irwin, as you can see here, Shirin Nishat, Anne Hamilton, Mona Hatoum, Cornelia Parker, Theaster Gates, Raphael Lozano Hemmer, Maya Lin. It's an extremely long list. Now Judith Schachter is part of it. Lisa Naples is another one. So you are familiar with both their works. And often the influence is not apparent in my work, but deals with the expansive nature of their works and how it allows me to expand my own work. And in other cases, like in this disc piece, you see Robert Irwin's influence quite visibly. I love artists and people who work with artists, as imagination to do bigger and better is often very inspiring to me. And technology has become an integral part of my practice. Working with fabricators allows me to work large to create work that is often immersive and transformational. Sorry. These paintings were completed in 2022 for my show in New York City at the Sundaram Tagore Gallery. I used pietra dura, a technique that helped construct the Taj Mahal, if anybody is familiar with that. It was actually a technique brought from Italy to India. The Taj Mahal was actually built in marble with inlay technique, with gems, semi-precious stones, and tile work. I used technology where artisans in the past carved by hand the patterns that adorn the Taj Mahal, which I think is amazing to kind of consider and think about over time. So I used a CNC machine and I used resin, and the process was extremely long-winded, which is either the bane or the love of my life. Charred gold was recently exhibited at the Crow Museum, was conceived during the pandemic again. My older sister died during the pandemic, and while I was, it was also the time when I was reading a lot of really heavy books that talked about race and gender, and I read Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. It's really, really kind of makes you want to weep. They were all very difficult books. These books deal with inequality, discussing politics that result in control of bodies, minds, resources, and borders, thus containment. And I thought of making a cube as a void. In this project, I chose a solid cube and added surface embellishment through language and pattern. So there are 81 cubes in this piece. They have both English and Urdu on two of their sides each. There are 26 words that sort of talk about the ways that people are kept down, such as war or religion or borders. And some consideration specifically for this piece was the weight we all carry, that is chaos, the messiness of human lives, as well as the desire for order and control, along with resources we consume in large quantities, labor and the value associated to the bodies that perform it. It's all black with a black glass floor, so the pedestal has a black glass. And so you can see it reflected, but it's hard to see. It's similar to the needle piece here, titled Flood of Tears. I kind of like to make it difficult for people to see, I guess. So this is it has 26 words, like I said, to show the visual weight and size of the types of repression that has been used to keep people fighting over scraps over the many centuries. These paintings are very new and were initiated during the pandemic again. So I was extremely productive because all I did was work. It has taken me 5 to 6 years to bring them to fruition. The first 2 years during the isolation, I cut hundreds or maybe thousands of birds and bees and trees and foliage and flora and fauna on paper, from oceans, from the earth, trees, plants, insects. I'm the queen of cutting, as I tell my students, or used to. Now that I do not teach, I can't say that anymore. These works are all hand-cut collaged paper, acrylic paint, metallic embroidery and beading, encompassed with resin. The series is titled Cabinets of Curiosities. They reference the penchant of Europeans to bring back with them exotic animals, plants, birds, bees, and humans from their travels to the exotic East, South, and West as trophies to display in cabinets to entertain their public. They are foundly out in the world for shows. The first one was at the Crow Museum. The middle piece was on their cover card, which was interesting to me. For the past decade, Steve and I have been snorkeling in the Caribbean and the Mexican side of the continent. Visually, there is a definite reduction in color in the coral, and its growth is stunted in the last multiple years. So additionally, there's a dissipation of the sea creatures one would see underwater as schools of fish would come at us with curiosity. Last year, we saw fewer sea creatures and the lack of vibrancy in the coral in the Caribbean. The warmer waters are bleaching the coral. The waste and plastic is visually depleting the wildlife in the oceans. In these works, there is no adherence to their geographical origins. I'm adding human anatomy and entails that often look like plants to show the connections and similarities between all the creatures on the world or on the earth, thus pointing to our symbiotic relationships with the planet and its denizens. I'm really loving this new direction. I'm very careful when something like this is pushing me. I listen, and I try to make the work, even if it takes me 10 years. Like the Flood of Tears took me 10 years to build. So, and that's, and I want to thank you, everybody, for coming out. I want to thank Josh and Laura and Anne and Westmoreland and Sylvia and Jeremiah for Doug for doing all this work on my behalf. This is just such a beautiful show here. It just looks stunning, and I am very, very grateful. Thank you. Should we do that?
This actually works well for me because you answered so beautifully some of the questions that I had in your talk. So, but one question I did want to ask is about the development of the current show, Interwoven, as a retrospective, and wondering about the process of working on that exhibition or putting together a retrospective at this point in your career, looking back at the work you created over several decades. And wondering if there were any, as you were working on a checklist with Jeremiah, the curator of the show, if there were any surprises to you or connections or through lines that you might not have recognized, I guess, as you looked back.
You know, it's so interesting to realize that as an artist, not at the end of my life, but in the middle of my life, I've realized I seem to have had always a plan. And that's very surprising because, you know, one thinks that, you know, you're working in the dark and you're going through life following opportunities or sort of thinking. You meet somebody, an artist, and they give you an idea or, excuse me, you kind of see something happening in front of you. But it seems to be all going towards the same direction. And my work in the textile industry in Pakistan really kind of set the tone in a sense for me because, you know, my undergrad is in fiber arts, my graduate studies is in fiber arts, yet I'm making sculptures. So people often think that I'm doing something completely different, but it's all coming from textiles and drawing. And that I thought was very interesting because I recently realized I've never been included in a textile fiber art book. And to me, that was very interesting. It just occurred to me the other day. I'm like thinking, that's so interesting that I've been doing fiber art for so long, but I use paper. So that changes. It's that whole battle between craft and fine art kind of thing that existed very early on during my initial career. And so I think that that was one of the things I also realized recently. But like you said, working on the show, I kind of thought I had a plan, although I didn't know I had a plan. I think that's really funny.
Yeah. At least it showed, the plan showed itself though at the end. Yeah.
It's almost everything will be revealed.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
So speaking of the time that we were developing the show together, one of the things that I was really struck about and that we talked about a lot was the visitor experience. And I think for those of you who have seen the show, you will obviously have noticed that many of Anila's works transform the whole room, whether it's through the interplay of light and shadow, the color, or the sheer scale, which of course the show also made my life as a designer very difficult because it was teeny tiny things and absolutely giant things, and trying to put them all in the same space and feel universal was great. It was a lot of fun. But the other thing we talked about was storytelling through immersion. And so the role of the visitor in the work itself. And so I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about what role do you hope the viewer plays in contemplating the stories that you're telling?
Well, the intent was always for them to consider the contradictions that exist in our own lives. You know, like things that happen without us realizing that we may be doing something that may hurt somebody, or, you know, the way we get hurt ourselves. That's just like the pain and love of life, right? And so I want the visitors to experience, no doubt, the beauty of the environment, but I also want to consider how valuable they are to the work itself, because without them, the work is not complete.
Right.
And so it's a way to kind of suggest that everybody has value. They, or in spite of whatever they believe, or whoever, or wherever they came from, whatever minority they are, it doesn't really matter what gender you are. If you're human, you're legitimate, you should or have the facility to be present and be part of the art. So to me, it's like adding value to the visitors through my work, but them realizing that they are doing it to themselves as well as to the work. And so it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship, which I find we as the denizens of this planet have with the planet itself. We have a symbiotic relationship. I wanted to kind of create that kind of feeling through the size and the scale of the work, so that they could feel like, you know, it's human size or bigger.
Right.
And so that's really important as well.
To quickly follow up, do you see it as more of a conversation between the viewer and the work, or are they part of the work? I think
Both.
You know, that's a question that we kind of get, where like people
Yeah.
are like experiencing all the flowers, and they're sort of like, the shadow is on them and it's on the wall, and they're like, am I the work, or am I experiencing a work? And I think to your point, it's
I want them to think that it's both.
Okay.
You know, like what I've noticed sometimes is in these spaces, some people go really quiet and they become introspective. Other people want to share that moment with somebody, even if it's a stranger. And they want to walk up to them and say, hey, this is so beautiful, it's making me cry. Right. And I think that that's the kind of thing I wanted to convey to people, that we are that important and that wonderful. We have accomplished many, many great things as humans, and we can continue to do that. It's just, how do we set about doing it? Do we do it in spite of others or with them?
Right,
you know.
right.
So so I want it to be viewed both as an object, but also interacting with the object, but interacting with it themselves and feeling part of the artwork. So it's sort of like complicated.
right. I like that.
It's not
That's good.
easy.
Right, that's good.
Well, I want to make sure we have time too to answer questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and Jen will come around with a microphone.
You do, right? Yes. Feel free to say no comment or not my circus, not my monkeys. But when non-arty people and Americans think of Islamic art, they think of one of the things they think of is the Danish controversy about cartoons about Muhammad. What was your reaction, if you had one, when this was in the news, and what do you think it's taught us?
That's a very painful and also a very complicated question, and would require a long and complicated answer. But the short version I would say is that I abhor violence in any form. And Islamic art is not about killing people. It's to exaggerate the beauty of nature. So if you have visited any part of the world where there was any old architectural remain from the Islamic dynasties or whatever, if you've been to Spain, you would notice that it's always about nature and the glorification of nature. And so what happened in Denmark, or the people that did it, obviously were extremists, and we have them here in the US too. And we do a lot of really heinous things to our own people. So I don't think that you can blame religion entirely for it. I think you can blame it on illiteracy or lack of understanding or lack of compassion maybe. I as an artist don't believe in any of that, and so for me it was an extremely, 9/11 was very hard for me too. But then if you think about the partition of India and Pakistan, that was extremely hard as well. And so the violence that humans perpetrate on other people is always horrifying. So if that is a good enough answer, or I can expound on it. Thank you for that.
Hi, thank you. First, thank you very much for sharing your life experiences and your art with us today. There's a lot to be learned there. So my question is focused on your life experiences, which certainly most people don't have the privilege of doing that and have the opportunity. And it's also focused on, a year ago, my wife and I spent time in China. Actually, 1 year ago, we were there. And if we didn't understand before we went there, we did as we toured China, that the vision and vitality for a more just and equitable future had shifted to the global South. Now, Americans and West Europeans are going to have a hard time dealing with that, but it's happening. So my question is, both from your perspective and what you have gained from viewers of your work, would you share some of the things that have been, the most difficult to have to face about our present day world, and the hope that you've gained also from those experiences?
I think one of the most difficult things to realize is that the global South or the poorest countries of the world are so much in debt to the IMF. Many economies are considered to have failed or are failing. Their people are going to continue to live, and they will continue to strive and try to survive. But many, many would have to migrate. And that is extremely hard to realize, that they have no place to go. They live kind of in between zones. Quite often, some years ago, I watched a BBC documentary on PBS that talked about these people who kind of become illegal aliens, and they travel, and they somehow become part of this in-between zone between countries in Europe. And it was so sad. It makes one cry so deeply, because we are doing that as a collective. I don't really know what solutions there are. I'm not a social scientist. But I can say that compassion would probably be the key here. I don't think we need to build a wall on the southern border at all, because that could be used to house the people that are homeless here. Instead of paying huge amounts of money to build a wall somewhere where it's gonna impede nature, it's gonna impede birds, it's gonna impede, the crossing of the water. I don't know, like so many problems. Like if you remember from earlier times, and my father was an engineer, and he was one of the people, part of a collective that had created the dams in Pakistan on the river Indus and multiple, other, to create water for the country after India and Pakistan separated. But that caused so many problems afterwards. They did not know. Often you don't know the kind of things that may happen later. And so, I think that we need to hire politicians who work on our behalf, not on their own behalf. And maybe compassion would be one of the key to kind of see if they have the compassion to listen to both sides, rather than just, our current situation is not good. Our military is not being paid. And who is running the government? So if you think about it, what's happening in our own country is not very good, right? So I don't really have an answer for that. I'm not, like I said, not a social scientist, but I hope that people would, protest on the 18th and make their voices heard.
Should we take one more question? Or do you, Joshua, you have some great questions if you want to ask one of yours. I'm going to put you on the
I have
spot.
long questions. That's what Laura's implying. We had a conversation earlier today.
Do we have one?
We have one in the
Okay,
back.
great.
We can do that. Or Mir.
Perfect.
We also have one up front.
How's Martha back there?
Okay. Anila, thank you so much for your beautiful and compassionate narrative. Really enjoyed listening to you, and I really enjoyed your art, so thank you. I sort of have a comment and sort of a question. So I'm also from Pakistan, and as I was coming in, I noticed that you had Faiz Sahab's Bol Ke Lab Azad Hai Tere on one of your paintings. So my question, and I love Faiz Sahab. He's a humanistic poet. For people who don't know, he comes from Pakistan and has written beautiful poetry. My question is that also a theme that you have utilized in your art, the juxtaposition of poetry with art?
I think any kind of humanities, that includes dance, poetry, prose, is a very important element of an artist's growth. Personally, I read a lot, or now I listen a lot to books on tape.
It counts.
But I think poetry is a way to convey something that is very important in a short amount of time. And I was once asked to describe my work, and I chose to describe it as poetic. And that's how I think of my work, as being poetic. It kind of can reach across universally without offending people, and then maybe, hopefully, people think about stuff that may not occur to them right off the bat. And so I think poetry, and Faiz Ahmed Faiz, as that wonderful lady talked about, is a wonderful poet from Pakistan. He talked about justice and not losing hope in face of adversity, and not be disillusioned. That was one of his biggest messages to the country of Pakistan, because people were losing hope. They were, so he was the one who kept endorsing the fact that if you rise and if you talk and you use your voice, you can make change. And so for me, poetry is extremely important. I do prefer prose because I can understand it slightly more recently. These days, poetry kind of is a little more like written stuff, like essays almost like. So, but yeah, poetry is very important, I think. Thank you so much for asking that question.
Can I build on that just a teeny little bit? Because one of the questions I wanted to ask was, and you mentioned like some of your earlier work is poetic, you prefer prose today. I am curious, if you look back at your earlier works, do they feel different to you now? You used a lot of symbols and a lot of imagery. How has your relationship with the symbols and icons that shifted and grown?
I kind of see the connections because I'm the one who's making the work. So I often, like I mentioned in my talk, that I can go back in time, look at a past work, bring it to the current or present, and remake it or add something to it. Right. I think of time as a continuum, you know, like it's sort of like this circular, circuitous situation going on, and if I have space where I can hang work and I can look at it, it informs the next work that I'm doing. And so when I was looking at the Interwoven, I think you asked me earlier, it was also really lovely to see how connected everything was. And the text I use is very deliberate. I use it only when I need it. The pattern I use is very deliberate. It's never exactly what you would find out there in the real Islamic world or natural world. But it's sort of like I reinterpret it, I collage it together. And so the text and the pattern often becomes like a collage of my own variation. But it still has an affinity to things that you may be familiar with. But like, for example, All the Flowers Are For Me, you will not find it all together in a single entity out there in the world. There are fragments from different parts of Asia and Old Persia. So Iran, but Old Persia. And so Persian textiles, Indian textiles, or carpets, or manuscripts, that's where I drew all of that from. And so it's like, I think I also love the old, the ancient, and I bring it to the present, because I feel like we are also connected. You know, we have survived for millennia on this planet, and it's important to keep it. And so I just kind of, maybe it's a regurgitation, I don't know.
Yeah, revisiting. I think it's
revisiting,
the idea of it,
maybe,
yeah. Take on new meaning.
Yeah.
Keep building on it. I like that. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Jen, I think Mira had a question up here up front, or time-wise, are we over?
I think this will have
Maybe we're over. Okay, last one.
I just had a question. Do you cut all that metal and process it all by yourself, or do you have lots of helpers?
Oh no, we go to the steel industry. My husband and partner Steve, who's sitting back there, he's the muscle behind all of that. Once I have done the design, and now I do it mostly on the computer. I kind of combine things and I work, and if you let me, I'll sit there and I'll work for 20 hours at a time and not get up, and so he'll come and make me get up and say, go take a walk or something. But like I generally will make the design, then he will take it on. He will fix it from his engineering point of view. He'll send it to a steel mill that will cut it on a laser machine if it's steel, or a water jet if it's stainless steel. So I use technology quite often to fabricate, and then once it comes back to our studio, he does the rest of the work, cleaning, polishing, and then we do get it painted outside. So industry is very closely entwined with the process as well. And I also like to give it to the people in our community as well, because you know, if you can hire people like artists or people who work with their hands, the economy gets better. So sometimes I'll hire fabricators who are artists to build stuff, and so it keeps the thing churning.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Anila, for your
thank
words
you.
and presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.